Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a company whose hands are in everything from making, say, golf carts and helicopters
Mm.
to developing the next generation of military drones and advanced weapons.
Mhm.
How does one company even operate across such wildly different areas?
Mhm.
And maybe more importantly, why is its defense business suddenly taking center stage globally?
Yeah, that company is Textron Inc. It's highly diversified, operates worldwide. And today we're going to do a deep dive using this investment analysis report to really understand what's happening there, particularly with their military and defense businesses.
Right, so our mission here is to slice through the data, get a clear picture of Textron's various parts, but then really focus in on those defense segments, mainly Bell, the rotorcraft powerhouse, and Textron Systems, which seems more focused on the advanced tech side.
And the report makes it pretty clear these areas are becoming increasingly vital to Textron's performance.
Yeah.
Especially, like you said, given the shifting global landscape and that significant surge in defense spending we're all seeing.
It feels like a really crucial moment to get a handle on how companies like Textron are positioned within all these dynamics.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, first big picture takeaway. Textron isn't just a defense contractor. They seem to wear quite a few different hats.
That's exactly right. The source lays out 6 primary business segments. You've got Textron Aviation, home to famous names like Cessna and Beechcraft. They're known for general aviation aircraft, turboprops, but they also play a role supporting military training and transport needs too.
And then there's Bell, the rotorcraft business. That's a core defense piece, definitely, but it also makes commercial helicopters.
Right. Then the industrial segment is quite varied. It includes Cotex. They do plastic fuel systems, battery enclosures for vehicles, and Textron specialized vehicles. That covers everything from EZZ golf carts, Cushman utility vehicles, even airport ground support equipment, and Jacobson turf care machinery.
Quite a mix.
Yeah, and the report points out this segment is much more sensitive to broader economic cycles than, say, their defense work.
Which is a key point of contrast, I think.
Yeah.
The Textron Systems, that's the other major military segment we need to explore, seems focused on more advanced products and systems.
Exactly. They also have Textron Aviation, which is specifically developing electric aircraft technology, kind of looking towards future flight. And lastly, there's finance, which provides financing solutions, mainly supporting sales for their aviation and Bell segments.
So this diversification, it's not just random. The report seems to highlight it as a strategic advantage, maybe a way to spread and mitigate risk.
Precisely. Think about 2024, which is mentioned in the source. Textron faced challenges like a strike impacting their aviation segment and some difficult market conditions in industrial.
Right.
But the strength in their aerospace and defense businesses helped offset those issues. And that contributed significantly to their projections for higher revenue and margin in 2025.
So it's like having those different business areas act as ballast when one hits, rough weather. And they're actively managing this portfolio too. The report mentions they're divesting their power sports business, including Arctic Cat, in Q1 2025.
Yeah, that came after a strategic review. It signals they're streamlining, shedding non-core assets to focus capital and management attention on areas they see as having stronger growth potential and strategic alignment, like aerospace and defense.
Makes sense. And is there potential for, cross-pollination, like expertise moving between segments?
Yeah, the report touches on that, how engineering, manufacturing, R&D expertise can transfer between commercial aerospace and defense. Plus, the work in aviation on things like electric propulsion and autonomous flight could potentially benefit military or commercial programs down the road.
Leveraging innovation across the whole company. Interesting. All right, now let's really zero in on the military machine. Bell and Textron Systems. These seem to be the segments primarily driving Textron's defense business.
Bell is, well, it's a legendary name in aerospace, a leading American manufacturer with key facilities down in Texas. They have a long, storied history with the U.S. military.
Oh, yeah, everyone knows the iconic helicopters like the Huey, the Cobra.
Right. And while they still produce modern versions like the UH-1Y Venom and the AH-1Z Viper, the report emphasizes one program as absolutely critical strategically right now: the U.S. Army's Future Long-Range Assault Aircraft, or FLRAA.
Okay, FLRAA. The report specifically highlights Bell achieving Milestone B approval for this. What does that actually mean in simple terms? Is that a big deal?
It's key. Milestone B is essentially the U.S. military giving the official go-ahead for the engineering and manufacturing development phase. It means the program is moving out of initial testing and into the serious long-term phase with significant funding attached.
Oh, okay. Serious money involved then.
Exactly. That's precisely why the report calls it a primary driver for Bell's military revenue growth. It specifically contributed to that $154 million increase we saw in Q1 2025 revenue for Bell. It's really a foundational program for their future vertical lift business.
So landing that FLRAA contract was a
Yeah.
huge win. Huge long-term implications. Now, what about Textron Systems? This seems like the segment focused more on the cutting edge, maybe.
Exactly. Textron Systems is focused on defense and homeland security, and their strategic direction is heavily weighted towards next generation and autonomous capabilities. That's where you see a lot of their innovation happening.
What kinds of things are in that portfolio, then?
It's a diverse range, but let's look at the types. First, unmanned aircraft systems, basically, military drones. Textron Systems is a major player here, providing systems for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance worldwide.
Drones are everywhere now.
Yeah, they really are. And instead of listing every single drone name, let's look at the impact. Their Aerosonde and Shadow Tactical UAS have accumulated over 650,000 and 1.5 million flight hours, respectively. That shows they have proven, reliable platforms in critical use by military.
Okay, so they're deeply embedded in that drone space.
Yeah.
What about on the water? Marine systems.
Yeah, on the Marine side, they're involved in advanced craft like the ship-to-shore connector for the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. But a significant one the report mentions is the Common Unmanned Surface Vehicle, or CUSV.
CUSC.
This is the Navy's first program of record for an unmanned surface vehicle, and it's used crucially for minesweeping. That tells you Textron Systems is designing the unmanned systems the Navy is choosing for critical future missions.
First program of record for an unmanned boat. That's significant.
Okay.
Moving from air and sea, what about ground vehicles?
Well, they produce traditional armored vehicles like the Commando, but what really stands out in their portfolio is their How and How subsidiary.
How and how?
Yeah, this is where you get platforms like the innovative RPSAW family. The M5 and M3 RPSAWs are these, well, they look pretty futuristic, robotic ground vehicles. They also make other robotic platforms like ballistic shields and even firefighting robots.
Wow.
So it shows Textron isn't just sticking to conventional vehicles, they're pushing into highly specialized unmanned ground capabilities.
Yeah, those RPSAWs are definitely eye-catching, very different. And they're also involved in weapon systems.
Yes, providing advanced kinetic and non-kinetic effects. They're a Tier 1 subcontractor on the Sentinel missile program's re-entry system. They're also designing the next-generation squad weapon for the U.S. Army. And a recent success highlighted in the report is the completion of first article testing that happened in May 2025 for their XM204 top attack munition.
Okay, first article testing. What does that mean in this context? Is that like final approval?
It's a crucial step, yeah. It basically means the munition has been certified and qualified for production and delivery to the U.S. Army and its allies. Its purpose is important too, enhancing counter-mobility on the battlefield, making it harder for enemy vehicles to move, and replacing older systems. So it's a new, relevant product line coming online for them.
Got it. And they provide more than just the hardware, right? There's support and training too.
Absolutely. They offer electronic systems and solutions covering things like RF and electro-optic devices used in various platforms and training systems. And significantly, they provide comprehensive end-to-end training solutions for air, land, sea, and unmanned systems. Their ATAC subsidiary even acts as the bad guys.
The adversaries.
Exactly. For U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force pilots in live training exercises. They provide adversary air services. It's quite a niche.
That is a unique service.
Yes.
And sustainment. That must be ongoing revenue.
Yes. Extensive sustainment services and field support for all their platforms. This is really important because it provides stable, recurring revenue after the initial sale, which is very valuable from a business perspective.
Okay, so the report makes it clear that securing programs like FLRAA, the MCM-USV, PDS, developing systems like the XM204, this is all key. How does this all tie into U.S. military priorities right now?
It seems to align directly. The U.S. military is prioritizing things like autonomous capabilities, precision strike, multi-domain operations, air, land, sea, cyber working together, and manned-unmanned teaming, or MUMT, where crewed platforms control unmanned ones.
Right.
Textron Systems focus on UAS, USVs, those robotic ground vehicles, and integrated control systems positions them squarely to meet these evolving requirements. It puts them arguably at the forefront of defense innovation in these areas.
All right, let's pivot a bit and look at the financial health specifically for Bell and Textron Systems. What do the numbers from the report tell us there?
Okay, for Bell, the financials show strong growth, particularly on the military side. In Q1 2025, their total revenue was $983 million. That's a significant jump from the previous year.
And how much of that increase was military?
The report specifically notes that military revenues increased by $154 million in Q1 2025. And where did that come from? Primarily from the FLRAA program and ongoing sustainment work.
Ah, FLREA again.
Yep. And this higher volume and favorable product mix led to an increase in segment profit to $90 million, which was up $10 million year over year.
So FLREA isn't just strategic for the future, it's already having a direct positive impact on Bell's bottom line right now.
Exactly. Now, Textron Systems tells a slightly different story on the top line, revenue-wise, recently. Their revenue has been more stable, maybe slightly down year over year in Q1 2025, 296 MOs versus 306 M, and also in Q4 2024.
So revenue is a bit flatter there compared to Bell, but is it still profitable?
Yes, and this is kind of interesting. Despite the slightly lower revenue in Q4 2024, their segment profit was actually up to $42 million from $35 million the year before.
Oh, how does that work?
Well, it suggests improved profitability. Could be due to better cost management or maybe a more favorable mix of the specific products and services they delivered in that period. More bang for the buck, essentially.
More efficient, even if not growing revenue quite as fast as Bell currently is. Okay. Now, the report talks a lot about backlog. Why is that such a critical number for these defense businesses? What is backlog, really?
Backlog is essentially the value of orders that have been secured but not yet delivered or billed. For defense companies, it's a really key indicator of future revenue visibility. It's basically their pipeline of guaranteed work.
Got it, like looking into the crystal ball for their sales.
Precisely. And Bell's backlog was substantial at $7.1 billion at the end of Q1 2025. Textron Systems had a backlog of $2.6 billion at the end of 2024.
Okay, decent numbers. And for the entire company, Textron overall.
This is the really compelling number the report highlights. Textron's total company backlog reached a very robust $17.9 billion at year-end 2024. But what's critical here is that this represents a significant $4 billion increase from the end of 2023.
Wow. Hold on. A jump of $4 billion in secured future business in just 1 year.
That's right. It's a powerful signal. That strong, growing backlog, particularly driven by aerospace and defense, provides solid visibility into future revenue. It acts as a cushion, really, underpinning overall financial stability, even if other parts of the business face challenges.
Right.
And the report emphasizes why large defense contracts contribute to this stability. They often span multiple years and are generally less susceptible to immediate economic ups and downs compared to purely commercial work. That predictability is highly valued by investors.
So that big backlog number is kind of a vote of confidence in their future revenue streams. Let's look specifically at some of the wins that are building that backlog. You mentioned FLRAA.
We already highlighted the FLRAA program for Bell. Yeah. Achieving Milestone B is crucial, and the report explicitly links it to that increase in Bell's military revenue we just discussed. It's a major long-term commitment shaping that backlog.
Okay. And Textron Systems seems to have had some notable success with the U.S. Navy recently, too.
Yes, definitely. Back in March 2025, they secured a contract for support services for the Mine Countermeasure Unmanned Surface Vehicle, the MCM USV we mentioned.
Right, the minesweeping drone boat.
Exactly. It has an initial value of $30 million, but could potentially go up to $100 million with options through 2027. And the report points out Textron was the original designer of the software for this system, so they're leveraging their existing expertise.
So providing ongoing support, software updates, that kind of thing, not just the initial sale.
Right. Recurring revenue again. And building on that unmanned marine capability, in December 2024, they won another contract valued up to $106 million. This one was for Minesweeping Payload Delivery Systems, or PDS. This system is used with their CUSV for semi-autonomous minesweeping. It really shows the Navy is continuing to invest in Textron's unmanned mine warfare solutions, building out that capability.
Makes sense. And you mentioned that new munition earlier, too, the XM204. That's part of this buildup.
Yes, the XM204 top attack munition. The successful completion of first article testing in May 2025 is a key milestone because, as we said, it means it's now certified and ready for production and delivery to the U.S. Army and its allies.
So ready to sell.
Ready to sell and deliver. This followed a prior contract just for that testing phase, and its purpose-enhancing counter-mobility, replacing older systems, meets a current Army need.
So these specific contract wins, FLRA, the Navy's unmanned systems support and payloads, the new munition. These are tangible examples of how Textron is securing those multi-year defense contracts that contribute directly to that growing backlog and provide that future revenue predictability we talked about.
Exactly. They represent concrete steps in delivering on their strategic focus in defense, and you can see it building in the numbers.
These markets are definitely competitive, though. I mean, who is Textron actually up against in these different areas? Let's start with helicopters, with Bell.
Sure. In the rotorcraft market, Bell competes with major players like Boeing Sikorsky Division and Lockheed Martin right here in the U.S. Internationally, the big competitors are Airbus Helicopters, which was the world's largest by market share not too long ago, and Leonardo Helicopters.
So they're going head-to-head with some of the biggest names in global aerospace.
Yeah.
That's tough competition.
Absolutely. And there are also other regional manufacturers. Interestingly, the report mentions Bell even has a partnership with Subaru in Japan for one of their helicopter models.
So competition, but also collaboration happening at the same time. Interesting. What about Textron Systems areas, the drones, the vehicles, all that?
That market is very diverse. For armored vehicles, competitors include names like BAE Systems, General Dynamics Land Systems, Oshkosh, Lockheed Martin, and European companies like GDELS. The military drone market is highly segmented.
Segmented how?
Well, you have companies specializing only in drones like AeroVironment or Kratos. Then you have defense contractors with dedicated drone divisions like Northrop Grumman or Elbit Systems. And then the really big aerospace giants like Lockheed Martin or Boeing who also have significant drone programs.
So Textron Systems is competing with a real mix of specialists and those huge prime contractors.
That's right. And more broadly across defense, they compete with those same major contractors. Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and globally with companies like Airbus as well.
Okay, given that really crowded space, how does the report suggest Textron differentiates itself? What's their angle?
Well, the report indicates Textron often focuses on specializing in specific, high-value niches, rather than trying to directly challenge the largest primes across every single major platform category.
Like the IPSR, the CUSV?
Exactly. Look at their IPS robotic vehicles or the CUSV unmanned boat. These are areas where they've developed unique expertise, often targeting emerging requirements.
Finding specific areas where they can be a leader, rather than trying to be everything to everyone.
Precisely. This allows them to target emerging military needs and maintain a competitive edge through innovation, aiming to achieve that coveted program of record status that leads to those long-term contracts we discussed. And as we noted earlier, the competitive landscape often involves partnership, too.
Right, the collaborations.
Their role as a Tier 1 subcontractor on the Sentinel missile system reentry part and collaborations, like the one with Subaru, are examples of how they mitigate risk, expand their market reach, and leverage complementary skills. That's especially important internationally.
That strategic approach makes a lot of sense in such a competitive field. Okay, so who are the actual buyers of all this gear? Who are Textron's main military customers?
Well, their primary and by far largest customer base is the U.S. military, across the different branches.
Like the U.S. Army, obviously, with FLRAA and the new weapons we talked about.
Yes, the Army is absolutely critical. The U.S. Navy is a significant customer for Textron Systems marine craft, like the Ship-to-Shore Connector and the CUSV, including those support and payload delivery contracts we just mentioned.
Oh.
The U.S. Marine Corps uses Bell helicopters like the Viper and Venom, and also Textron Systems vehicles like the SSC, and they're evaluating the Cottonmouth ARV. Plus, they benefit from the ATAC training. And the Air Force also uses ATAC for adversary air training. The Department of Defense, of course, is the overarching entity influencing requirements and funding.
So, heavy reliance on the U.S. military. But the report also points to the increasing importance of international customers, right?
Absolutely. Textron explicitly targets non-U.S. military and international militaries as customer groups. You see sales of their armored vehicles globally. Specific examples from the report include Bell receiving orders for the Subaru Bell 412 EPX helicopter from Interior Ministries in Sarajevo and Croatia in Europe.
Huh?
The Bell 412 platform already has a pretty significant presence in Europe for various missions, over 130 aircraft apparently. Plus, remember that XM204 munition is certified for delivery to U.S. Army allies, which naturally includes many European NATO members.
So Europe is definitely a growing market for them, it sounds like.
Definitely. And in Asia-Pacific, Bell secured 412 EPX orders from the Japan Coast Guard. The report notes increasing defense spending and openness to international partnerships in that region as well.
And the Middle East.
While specific Middle Eastern customers aren't named in this particular source, the region is experiencing a rapid surge in military spending, especially in places like Israel and Saudi Arabia, which are major buyers of American arms. The report views this as a significant market opportunity for U.S. suppliers like Textron.
So the report is very clear that this focus on international military sales is becoming strategically more significant for Textron.
Yes, it seems to be a deliberate strategy for diversification, gaining access to new growth areas, and building resilience against potential changes or fluctuations in U.S. domestic budgets or policy shifts down the line.
This brings us neatly to the big picture tailwind you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
That massive increase we're seeing in global defense spending.
That's what the report emphasizes as a major underlying driver for the defense sector right now. We're seeing a dramatic upswing globally, fueled by heightened geopolitical tensions, the conflict in Ukraine, U.S.-China competition, just a general worsening security environment worldwide.
Yeah, you can't miss it.
The report describes it as the steepest year-on-year rise in global spending since at least 1988, with all 5 major world regions increasing their budgets in 2024. This isn't just a blip. It seems to be a sustained long-term trend.
Okay, let's break that down. Where is that spending happening? The U.S. is still number one, I assume.
Yes, the U.S. spent nearly $1 trillion, $997 billion in 2024, still the largest by far. Now, while some projections see defense spending potentially declining as a share of GDP long-term, the absolute dollar cost of the DoD's plans is projected to increase significantly by about 11% between 2029 and 2039.
Increase. Where's that money going?
Primarily driven by operations, support, and acquisition, exactly the areas Textron supplies into. The proposed 2025 budget is slightly down from 2024, but still enormous at $850 billion.
But the really dramatic surge, the big percentage jumps, seem to be in Europe and NATO, right?
Absolutely. Military spending in Europe jumped dramatically, up 17% to $693 billion in 2024, with nearly every country increasing budgets. NATO collectively spent over $1.5 trillion.
Filling with a T.
With European NATO members contributing $454 billion of that. And a key metric the report points to is the significant increase in NATO members meeting that 2% of GDP spending target 18 out of 32 members in 2024, up from only 11 the year before. EU spending is also increasing, often debt-financed, projected to rise linearly through 2028.
And crucially, this directly translates into demand for U.S. defense companies like Textron.
Yes, crucially, the report highlights that arms imports by European NATO members actually more than doubled from the 2015-19 period compared to 2020-24. And importantly, the U.S. share of those imports increased from 52% to 64%.
Wow, 64% of European NATO imports coming from the U.S. That's powerful evidence.
It really is. It shows a growing reliance on U.S. suppliers like Textron to meet immediate defense needs, likely due to capacity or speed issues within Europe.
What about other regions? Asia Pacific, Middle East?
Asia Pacific is investing more in procurement and R&D, often relying on imports for advanced capabilities. The Middle East saw that rapid 15% surge in spending in 2024 we mentioned, driven by regional conflicts, particularly Israel's massive 65% increase, and Saudi Arabia's continued high spending. These regions are increasingly significant customers for American arms.
So how does this massive global spending trend directly benefit Textron, according to the report?
Well, the report states that Textron's diversified defense portfolio covering air, land, and sea positions it exceptionally well to capture opportunities arising from these broad increases in procurement and modernization efforts worldwide. They have relevant products for different domains and different types of customers, from high-end helicopters to munitions to unmanned systems.
Now, there's also been talk about potential U.S. strategic shifts, maybe focusing more elsewhere, or Europe aiming for more defense self-reliance, like mentioned in the Draghi report. How does Textron fit into that narrative? Is that a risk?
The report actually frames this not just as a risk, but potentially as a dual opportunity for Textron. While there are discussions about the U.S. focusing more on the Indo-Pacific or Europe building its own defense industry, the immediate reality, as shown by those increased European imports from the U.S., is a growing reliance on proven U.S. systems right now.
So demand is up now.
Exactly. And even as Europe works to develop its own capabilities, the report notes potential bottlenecks in their ability to ramp up production quickly. This means there will likely be a continuing need for external suppliers like Textron in the near to medium term. And it could even open doors for future partnerships or joint programs as European industry builds up.
So the current instability and the longer-term push for self-reliance both create avenues for Textron immediate demand and potential future collaboration.
Precisely. It's a dynamic, complex environment they're navigating, but one with clear opportunities alongside the risks.
Okay, let's try and tie this all together from an investment perspective. What does this mean for someone looking at Textron stock, ticker TXT?
Right. So, from an investment standpoint, the report presents a company with a diverse revenue base, but with its core aerospace and defense segments showing strong performance and a pretty positive outlook, underpinned by that global spending trend.
Looking at the top-line financials you mentioned, consolidated revenue was $3.3 billion in Q1 2025, up $171 million year over year.
And adjusted earnings per share, EPS, was also up in Q1 2025, $1.28 versus $1.20. The company reaffirmed a solid full-year 2025 outlook of $6 to $6.20 per share, which is up nicely from $5.48 in 2024.
And they're projecting higher revenue overall for 2025, too.
Yeah, they're forecasting total revenue around $14.7 billion for 2025, up from $13.7 billion in 2024. That projected growth is based on stabilizing production in the aviation segment, continued strength in aerospace and defense, and hopefully improved cost management elsewhere, like in industrial.
What about cash flow? That could be a bit lumpy sometimes for these kinds of companies.
They can. Manufacturing cash flow before pension contributions was actually a use of cash, $158 million, in Q1 2025, similar to Q1 2024. And full year 2024 cash flow was down a bit from 2023. But and this is important for the outlook, they're projecting a significant rebound for full year 2025 manufacturing cash flow. They're targeting $800 million to $900 million. That projected improvement is a key factor for investors watching the company.
Okay, a projected cash flow rebound is definitely positive. And their debt situation, manageable.
The report suggests manageable debt levels, yeah. With a healthy debt-to-equity ratio and strong interest coverage. Look like a pretty stable capital structure overall.
And how are they returning value to shareholders?
Mm-hmm.
Dividends, buybacks.
They're actively buying back shares quite a bit, actually. $215 million in Q1 2025 alone, and $1.1 billion in all of 2024. Share buybacks can help boost EPS over time. They also pay a small but consistent quarterly dividend.
Okay. Looking at the stock itself, NYSE ticker TXT, what does its recent performance tell us? The report had some data.
Yeah, as of late May 2025, when this analysis was done, the price was around $74, market cap about $13.4 billion. The report does note the short-term performance has been mixed, even negative if you look at the last year or 6 months.
Right, so if you just glance at the recent chart, it might not look super exciting.
Exactly, but you have to contrast that with the strong long-term performance. It's been up significantly over the last month at the time of the report, and substantially over the last 3 and 5 years. The all-time return is actually over 1,000%. It really shows the value of looking beyond just short-term stock price fluctuations or noise.
Good point. Volatile.
The report also notes it's slightly more volatile than the broader market, with a beta around 1.2, 1.27, depending on the source. They did beat earnings expectations in Q1 2025, and their next earnings report is expected in July.
Okay, so wrapping up the investment angle. Solid underlying financials driven by defense, a positive outlook, a massive growing backlog, but with some recent stock price weakness and maybe slightly higher volatility. What are the big risks an investor really needs to keep in mind here?
The report lays out several key risks. Geopolitical risks are probably paramount policy uncertainty, especially regarding U.S. foreign policy shifts, future support for allies. That could impact international sales significantly. Production disruptions, like that aviation strike they had in 2024, can definitely hit operations and financials.
And the non-defense parts.
Right. The industrial segment remains a challenge due to difficult end markets and its sensitivity to the economy. And of course, intense competition exists across the board in every segment they operate in.
Government contracts have their own risks too, right?
Absolutely. There's the complexity and potential for issues or delays in government procurement processes, which can be notoriously lengthy. And fundamentally, a heavy reliance on government contracts means they are always subject to budget changes or shifting political priorities. The report also mentions past investigations into alleged bribery as a potential risk factor, highlighting compliance and reputational challenges that can arise in international defense markets.
Okay, so those are the potential downsides to weigh. What about the key opportunities driving that positive outlook the report mentions?
The biggest one, hands down, is that surging global defense spending environment. The report calls it a major tailwind. Modernization initiatives worldwide, particularly the focus on autonomous systems, precision weapons, and integrated capabilities that aligns perfectly with Textron's system strategy and Bell's big FLRAA program win.
And international expansion.
Yes, international market expansion, driven by that increased spending in Europe and NATO, Asia Pacific, and the Middle East, is a significant opportunity. Plus, new product development, like the RIPSA vehicles or the newly certified XM204 munition, helps them capture those emerging requirements and win new business.
And don't forget that stable sustainment revenue stream.
Exactly. Aftermarket and sustainment services provide reliable, recurring revenue streams, contributing significantly to long-term financial stability and smoothing out lumpiness from big platform sales. And that strategic decision to divest non-core assets like powersports is aimed squarely at focusing investment and management attention on these higher growth areas like defense and aerospace.
So it's interesting that geopolitical instability is both a major risk factor, but also the primary source of their biggest opportunity, that increased global demand for defense products.
It's the core dynamic, isn't it? The demand is high because the world feels more volatile and dangerous, but that same volatility introduces policy and budget uncertainty that companies like Textron constantly have to navigate.
Okay, let's try and bring this deep dive to a close then.
So, to sum it all up, Textron is clearly a truly diversified company, but our look at the sources, particularly this investment analysis, shows that its defense segments, Bell and Textron systems, are currently very significant drivers of its performance and future outlook.
Right, and this is being fueled by key program wins like the FLRA helicopter for Bell and advanced systems like the CUSV unmanned boats, the new XM204 munition, and those robotic vehicles coming out of Textron systems.
And they are clearly benefiting from that major global increase in defense spending and modernization efforts, especially the substantial rearmament happening across Europe and within NATO, where, as we saw, the reliance on U.S. suppliers seems to be growing right now.
You can see this reflected directly in their financials, particularly the profit growth in defense, and maybe most importantly for the future, in that robust and significantly growing total company backlog. That provides really strong visibility into future revenue streams.
Yeah. So while the company certainly navigates inherent risks from its diverse operations and operates within a complex, sometimes unpredictable geopolitical environment, the defense business appears to provide a solid foundation of stability and genuinely promising growth potential moving forward.
You know, understanding a company like Textron really helps you see how those big global headlines, things like conflicts, changing alliances, or national defense budgets, have a direct ripple effect. How they impact specific industries and the companies that operate within them, right down to the technology they develop, their financial performance, and even their stock valuation.
It absolutely connects those world events to the business world in a very tangible, concrete way.
So here's maybe something to consider as we wrap up this deep dive. How might this global push for accelerated military modernization, and alongside it, the desire for greater defense self-reliance in places like Europe, how might that reshape the defense industrial base itself in the coming years? Will we see more international partnerships, maybe like the Bell Subaru example? Or will the competition intensify, maybe become more continental? And maybe the bigger question, what does this rapidly advancing pace of defense technology, from autonomous systems to novel munitions, ultimately mean for the future of global security?
Complex questions for complex times indeed. Lots to think about there.